Hello, my name is Carter Smith,
And I'm Duran Delgadillo.
and we're going to talk to you about business risks in Mexico. We're going to be covering three different kinds of risks: currency risk, cultural risk, and country risk. So, what is currency risk? Currency risk is the risk of adverse fluctuation in currency exchange rates. So, knowing how stable a currency is gives you a good idea of whether you want to invest in that foreign country or not. So, it's good to know how stable your currency is. The currency of Mexico is the peso. So when it comes to trading the peso, it's the same as any other currency. You'd want to be following the economic news, monetary policy, interest rates, and political factors surrounding the peso. The US dollar is currently going up against the peso, but is expected to drop in the future. So the US dollar is currently strengthening, but the peso is expected to strengthen in the long run. So shorting the peso or selling the peso is popular because the USD is consistently rising against it. So Mexico and oil. The Mexican economy relies heavily on oil, and oil has fallen over 60% over the past 2 years. So as volatility in their emerging markets has increased, the oil has been falling, which has been hurting the economy. But the Mexican economy is very resilient and continues to grow at a moderate pace despite these shocks because inflation is low and yields on peso denominated bonds have been stable. So the economy is expected to grow 2.25% this year and 2.5% next year. Um, the North American Free Trade Agreement has definitely increased prosperity of the middle class and just basically everyone in Mexico. So here's a look at the long run economic development of Mexico. Like I said, Mexico's economy is expected to keep improving. So, for international business interested in trading across international borders, the ability to trade directly in the emerging markets will be very helpful for foreign direct investments. Um, just a few more notes. Large volatility can mean large profits and losses. This means that in when you're trading the peso, so many people trade the peso that the market exchange rate fluctuates extremely high and low. So you could be making a lot of money or you could be losing a lot of money. So another thing, the peso is the most highly traded currency out of all the emerging markets. And the peso is often used by investors to hedge emerging market exposure and sold off in times of global financial turmoil. One more thing, the Mexican exchange is increasing its bandwidth and level of connection to allow trading in the thousandths of a second. So that means that even more volatility will come into a market and even more people trading the peso. So here we have a 5 year chart for the peso, and you can see it's had highs and lows, but overall it's continuing in the upward direction. So now we'll look at the 1 year forex chart, and you can see that it's been going up a lot this year, but has been going down in the recent months. Um, That means that the US dollar has been consistently strengthening against the peso, but the peso does make a comeback in the last recent months.
Cultural risk, or cross-cultural risk, is a situation or event in which a cultural misunderstanding puts some human value at stake. Some cultural differences to be aware of in Mexico are relationships, communications. Mexicans put a lot of reliance on personal relationships rather than business contacts. It's really important to make a strong personal bond with a business partner. And in the US, business relationships are often more important than personal relationships with business partners, whereas the opposite is the norm in Mexico. Also, when it comes to communication, in the US, we say no or overtly show our disagreements. In Mexico, their version of no is maybe or I'll get back to you, and they don't strongly show or voice their disagreements very often. As far as time, many other Mexicans have a more loose sense of time and may show up late. There are some business people used to doing business with Americans and they make their meetings on time, but the norm in Mexico is most meetings start late and run late. Mexicans reserve their weekend time for families, so negotiations usually do not occur on weekends. This is important because it shows that you shouldn't schedule meetings or any kind of negotiation on weekends because they may take offense to it and they may take it personal as if you're drawing time away from them and their family. And business meetings and negotiations often proceed slower as there's more focus on the personal aspect of the business deal. The business structure and Mexican businesses, most companies maintain a centralized decision making process with all important decisions made by the key senior officials. It is an insult to send a junior employee to a Mexican firm for business meetings. It is best to match seniority during all interactions. So if your company has a meeting with their CEO, it's best that your CEO goes to meet theirs. And if a Mexican company sends you a junior employee to meet with, it's usually a sign of lack of genuine interest on their part. Many Mexican managers are thought to be authoritative but never authoritarian. They stress importance on showing the boss has control, but that the boss is also personable. It is an insult to criticize others in public. Doing so results in a loss of self esteem and personal dignity on the part of the one that was criticized. Also, the manager subordinate relationship is viewed as reciprocal. If the subordinate shows loyalty to the manager, then the manager will look after the interests of the subordinates. As far as meeting goes, unlike in America, if agendas are present at the meeting, there's little to no expectation among Mexican businessmen that they will be used. If a businessman becomes emotional during a meeting, they have not lost their professionalism, but it's their way of showing their sense of commitment and interest, as opposed to in America, where if you lose your control or you become emotional during a meeting, it's seen as a loss of control and sometimes even a sign of weakness. Also, it's highly common for small side meetings to occur during the larger meeting. Just some other cultural norms. Mexicans do not have as much of a personal space as Americans. They tend to stand a lot closer. Physically backing away is considered unfriendly. When women are making business deals or having business meetings in Mexico, women should always initiate the handshakes with men. And when first introduced, always address Mexican businessmen by their professional title, followed by their surname. If they do not have a title such as lawyer, engineer, doctor, you address them by their custom titles, which would be senor, senora. What is country risk? Country risk is exposure to potential loss or adverse effects on company operations and profitability caused by developments in a country's political and or legal environments. The dimensions of country risk are harmful or unstable political system, laws and regulations unfavorable to foreign firms, bureaucracy and red tape, corruption and other ethical blunders, and more. Mexico's country risk is a 4 on a scale of 0 to 10. The higher the number, the higher the risk. Some specific risks to Mexico: increasing security problem with drug cartels, just constant fighting back and forth. The growing crime rate, which is also partly due to the cartels, and also the widespread corruption throughout law enforcement agencies, the government, and some of the bureaucracy, which in turn makes the cartels harder to fight and it makes the crime harder to stop. But some positives for Mexico is they're politically relatively stable. They have the support of the U.S. in their difficult times. They have reassuring economic policies. They're committed to growth and have a steady growth rate. Also, they have one of the lowest country risks among other emerging nations.
Okay, so to summarize currency risk for Mexico, the US dollar is strengthening against the peso, but in the long run, the peso is still growing moderately.
Mexicans place more focus on personal relationships and business settings than we do in America. And while Mexico has a stable political system, they have a long battle with corruption and the cartels.